There is a version of your mind that only appears when you are asleep. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't follow the rules you use to get through the day. It takes a face you trust and places it in a hallway from 30 years ago. It gives you an emotion without a name and a landscape that couldn't exist. And then, just as something is becoming clear, it dissolves. And you wake holding nothing but the feeling it left behind. You have probably tried to make sense of it. Most people do. They reach for the logic they use everywhere else, and they come up empty, and they decide the dream meant nothing, or worse, that something is wrong with them for having such a strange mind at night. But the strangeness is not a malfunction. What your dreaming brain is doing, right now, in the hours ahead, is something so intricate and so specifically suited to the way your mind works that science has only recently begun to name it. The question tonight is not what your dreams mean. It is something older than that. Why does the brain choose its most illogical moments to carry its most important messages? Welcome to Psychology for Sleep. Let that question settle somewhere behind your closed eyes. You don't need to solve it tonight or understand it. You only need to be here. You already know this feeling. Waking from a dream so strange you couldn't describe it to anyone. Carrying an emotion you couldn't name. What you may not know is that the strangeness has a mechanism. During REM sleep, the mind activates cross-modal association, the linking of memories, sensory experiences, and emotional states stored during waking hours in separate compartments. Think of it as the sleeping mind drawing a line between things that share a feeling, even when they share nothing else. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for logic, sequence, and self-censorship, reduces its activity significantly in REM. What remains runs freely, without the editor. The result is not chaos. It is a different kind of order, one that follows emotional weight instead of logic. The brain you carry into sleep is not the same brain that wakes. During waking hours, your prefrontal cortex acts as a gatekeeper, filtering, sequencing, suppressing. It keeps the dream logic out. But when you enter REM sleep, prefrontal activity drops measurably, and the networks that generate imagination, memory, and emotion are left to run without that filter. Brain imaging has confirmed that during REM, the limbic system, including the amygdala, which processes emotional intensity, becomes significantly more active than during waking life. Highly sensitive people show, on average, a more reactive amygdala baseline. When the filter drops at night, there is more emotional material waiting. The dreams reflect that. Memory does not live in one place. This is one of the foundational findings of modern neuroscience, and one of the reasons dreams feel so spatially impossible. Different types of memory are stored in different regions. Episodic memory in the hippocampus, emotional memory in the amygdala, procedural memory in the cerebellum, semantic knowledge distributed across the cortex. During REM sleep, the hippocampus replays recent experiences and sends signals to the cortex, which responds with related older memories. When these signals arrive simultaneously from different regions, the sleeping mind does not separate them, it weaves them. The result is a grandmother who speaks with a colleague's voice in the kitchen of a house you left at age 7. Hyperassociative cognition is the term neuroscience uses for what the sleeping mind does with unrelated information. In waking life, the prefrontal cortex suppresses associations that are too distant. It keeps thinking linear, purposeful, on task. During REM, with that suppression reduced, the mind draws connections across concepts, memories, and emotional states that have no obvious logical link. What emerges is not a bug. Studies of creative problem-solving consistently show that this kind of thinking, the kind that surfaces in dreams, produces solutions and understandings that linear logic cannot reach. The illogical scenario is often the mind arriving at something the waking self was circling without finding. You may have noticed that some of your most emotionally intense dreams involve people you haven't thought about in years. A childhood friend, a teacher from elementary school, someone you barely knew. The charge is what calls them back. The sleeping mind prioritizes memory consolidation based on emotional salience, not chronological recency. A memory tagged with strong emotion, even a small moment of shame or connection from 20 years ago, is more likely to activate during REM than a neutral memory from yesterday. The nocturnal mind is not browsing your history at random. It returns to what still carries weight. The default mode network, a collection of brain regions that activate when you are not focused on an external task, is one of the most active networks during REM sleep. During waking life, this network generates self-referential thought. You think about yourself, your relationships, your future, your past. During dreaming, the same network runs without the usual constraints of time or social context. This is part of why dreams so often feel deeply personal, even when the content is fantastical. The default mode network is, in a sense, your brain's self-narrative generator. And in REM sleep, it generates that narrative without the editing that keeps your waking self coherent and presentable. One of the most consistent findings in dream research is that the emotional tone of a dream often does not match its content. You might dream of something mundane, a grocery store, a parking lot, a hallway, and wake feeling profound grief, or dream of something terrifying and wake feeling oddly calm. This dissociation is a feature of how the sleeping mind processes affect. The emotion being processed is real and significant. The scenario is the mind's metaphor for it, not the literal source. Sleep researchers have described REM as a form of overnight emotional processing, in which the charge attached to a memory is gradually separated from the memory itself, leaving the feeling worked through and the content less raw. Sensitive people, those who process sensory and emotional information more deeply, a trait studied by psychologist Elaine Aron, show measurable differences in how their brains respond to emotional stimuli during waking. Higher amygdala reactivity, deeper processing in areas related to awareness and empathy, stronger links between sensory cortex and emotional centers. These same differences do not disappear during sleep. A nervous system built to register the world at depth during the day continues doing so at night, and the material it brings into REM sleep is richer, more layered, and more emotionally complex than average. The strange dreams are not a symptom of being too sensitive. They are what the system looks like when it is doing its most detailed work. The sleeping mind does not encode emotions and contexts separately. It encodes them together. A memory of a difficult conversation carries not just the words and the room, but the temperature of the air, the angle of the light, the feeling in your chest. When that memory reactivates during REM sleep, all of those components reactivate together, and then the linking begins. This emotional quality matches something else. This sensory detail connects to that other memory. This unresolved feeling is related to that older one. What emerges is not a literal replay, a composite, drawn together by what still carries weight. Something important has shifted in what the evidence so far suggests. Not a conclusion, but a different way of reading the original question. We began by asking why the brain would choose illogical images for important messages. What the first layer of science suggests is that the brain isn't choosing illogic, it is working in a different logic entirely. One organized by emotional weight and cross-modal association rather than sequence and cause. The dream isn't the message written badly. It may be the message written in the only language that can carry this particular content without distorting it. REM sleep occurs in cycles across the night, with each successive cycle containing a longer REM period than the last. The first REM episode of the night lasts roughly 10 minutes. By the final cycle, in the hours just before waking, REM periods can extend to 45 minutes or more. The most vivid, emotionally complex dreams tend to occur in the hours just before you open your eyes. The dream you remember most clearly is almost always one of the last of the night, representing the mind's most advanced processing of the emotional material it has been working through since you fell asleep. The hippocampus, the brain structure most associated with memory formation and retrieval, plays a specific role in dream generation. During waking life, it acts as a temporary holding space for new experiences before they transfer to long-term storage in the cortex. During REM sleep, it replays those recent experiences, not as exact recordings, but as compressed, emotionally highlighted summaries. These replays are sent to the cortex, which responds with associated older memories from a different time. What emerges is the layered, time-collapsed feeling of dreams. The recent event overlaid with the older memory that rhymes with it emotionally. Sometimes you dream about something you haven't thought about in months. And then, in the days that follow, find that very thing surfacing in your waking thoughts with unusual clarity. During REM sleep, the mind reactivates dormant memory traces, not randomly, but following the pattern of emotional relevance. A memory that was stored but not yet integrated. An experience that was too much or too soon to fully process may be reactivated during REM and brought a little closer to resolution. The dream is sometimes the beginning of understanding, appearing before the waking mind catches up. The amygdala's role in dreaming is larger than its role in waking perception. During REM sleep, the amygdala, which evaluates emotional significance and triggers responses to perceived threat or reward, is more active than at almost any other point in the sleep cycle. It responds to internal signals, not external ones. It registers the emotional weight of a memory, even when the content is not threatening in any literal sense. This is why a dream about something as neutral as a staircase can produce the feeling of dread, and a dream about something frightening can produce unexpected peace. The amygdala is responding to the emotional truth underneath the image, not the image itself. People who process emotion at depth often show stronger connectivity between the insula, the brain region associated with sensing one's own internal states, and the regions involved in empathy and emotional processing. In sleep, this connectivity may shape what sensitive people dream. a felt sense of someone else's inner world, an emotional quality that was still physically present in the body when you woke. Not a thought about the dream, but a somatic trace the body carried into the morning. The nocturnal experience for a sensitive person doesn't just have an emotional component. It has a bodily one that follows them out of sleep. One of the more surprising findings in sleep science is that emotional memories are not simply stored during sleep. They are modified. Research has shown that during REM sleep, norepinephrine, the neurochemical associated with stress and emotional reactivity, drops to its lowest level of the 24-hour cycle. This creates a neurochemical environment where the mind can re-examine emotionally charged memories with the stress response dampened. Over successive nights, a memory that initially carried intense fear or grief can become something the mind holds more quietly. Sleep does not erase the memory. It changes the relationship to it. The narrative structure of a dream, the sense that something is happening, that there is a scene, a place, a sequence, is generated by the mind's pattern completion systems. The sleeping mind is not content to hold isolated emotional fragments. It assembles them into something story-shaped, because story is how the human mind organizes experience. But in REM sleep, without the prefrontal cortex enforcing logical consistency, the story is assembled from whatever fragments carry the highest emotional relevance, regardless of whether they fit together in any literal sense. The result is a narrative that violates the rules of time and space while remaining internally emotionally coherent. Your mind at night is not asking, when did this happen? It is asking, what does this feel like? And what else in my life has felt like this? A moment of inadequacy from last Tuesday and a memory of being overlooked at age 9 may be processed together not because they share context, but because they share emotional texture. Researchers call this semantic integration, the linking of emotionally similar experiences across time. The nocturnal scenario that contains them both is the mind's attempt to find the common thread, and, when possible, to find a way through it. People who are higher in trait sensitivity tend to report more vivid, emotionally complex, and narrative-rich dreams than those lower in sensitivity. They are also more likely to wake with the emotional residue of a dream still present. The feeling of grief or warmth or unease that persists into the morning without a clear source. This is not a sign that the dream disturbed them. It is a sign that the processing went deep, that the mind stayed with the material longer than most. The emotional residue is the feeling of work that was done, and that doing left a mark. The prefrontal cortex, when active during waking life, does more than maintain logic. It also maintains self-concept. It tells you who you are, what is consistent with your identity, what is permissible to feel. With prefrontal activity reduced during REM, the self that appears in dreams is sometimes a different self, braver, more afraid, capable of things the waking self would not attempt. Subject to feelings the waking self has carefully managed. This loosening allows the mind to explore emotional possibilities that waking identity forecloses. A kind of low-stakes rehearsal for emotional states the person has not yet allowed themselves to fully inhabit. The experience of waking abruptly from a dream and losing it almost immediately, the image dissolving within seconds, is related to the neurochemical shift that accompanies waking. As the mind transitions from REM to wakefulness, norepinephrine rises, acetylcholine drops, and the prefrontal cortex reactivates. The memory of the dream, encoded in a neurochemical environment that no longer exists, does not transfer cleanly into waking memory. It fades not because it wasn't real, but because the mind that was running it has already shifted into a different state, a whole world, briefly coherent, gone before you can hold it. Dreaming may have originally evolved as a mechanism for simulating threatening scenarios in a safe context, allowing the organism to rehearse responses before encountering them in waking life. But in humans, this function has expanded significantly beyond physical threat and survival. The scenarios are now often emotional rather than physical. Rejection, inadequacy, loss, misunderstanding, the specific pain of being unseen. The sleeping mind runs these simulations not to prepare for a literal event, but to process the emotional weight of similar past experiences and to explore, in genuinely low-stakes conditions, how the self might respond differently than it has before. Something happens inside a dream that logic outside it cannot explain. There is a quality of coherence while the dream is happening. The rules make sense. The people make sense. The situation makes sense. And then it dissolves the moment you wake. This in-dream coherence is not illusory. It is a different cognitive mode, emotionally organized, associatively linked, internally consistent by emotional rules rather than logical ones. The experience of waking and finding the dream suddenly nonsensical is not the dream revealing itself as false. It is the reactivation of a different cognitive mode, the waking one, which applies different standards of coherence and finds the dream wanting by standards the dream was never trying to meet. People who are woken during REM sleep and asked to report their dreams describe the emotional content with far more clarity than the narrative content. They know exactly how something felt, the weight of it, the quality of the fear or the longing, the specific texture of the dread or the warmth. But the story around it is already becoming uncertain. This asymmetry tells researchers something important about what the sleeping mind is actually encoding. The emotion is primary, and the entire scenario is assembled around it. The dream is held together by its feeling, not its plot. What this stretch of science keeps returning to is not about the content of any particular dream. It is about what the sleeping mind is organized around. Not sequence, not logic, not the story that makes sense in daylight. The nocturnal mind is organized around emotional weight. The things that still carry charge, still ask to be understood, still wait underneath the waking day. The illogical scenario is strange because it is assembled from the parts of your inner life that don't fit neatly into words. The question that opened tonight has not closed, but it is starting to look different. Not why does the mind choose illogic, but what is this other kind of logic? And what does it know that the waking self keeps missing? The relationship between REM sleep and emotional regulation is one of the most replicated findings in modern sleep science. Studies consistently show that people deprived of REM sleep, even while getting adequate total sleep, show significantly impaired emotional regulation the following day, greater reactivity to negative stimuli, reduced capacity to modulate emotional responses, a flattening of positive affect. The mechanism appears to involve the interaction between the amygdala and the medial prefrontal cortex during REM. The sleeping mind rehearses the regulatory relationship between emotional intensity and cognitive response, and this rehearsal supports waking emotional function. The nocturnal scenario is part of what makes the next day livable. That cross-modal assembling, the sleeping mind drawing lines between things that share a feeling, is happening right now, somewhere beneath your awareness. The question has turned in your hands. Not broken logic, but a different logic, running on something older than words. Let that thought drift forward. What follows finds what that logic knows about the emotional truths that don't dissolve when the story does. Your waking worries don't disappear when you sleep. They change shape. Waking concerns, experiences, and anxieties tend to appear in dream content transformed. Researchers studying this have found that the emotional core of a waking concern tends to be preserved and even amplified in the dream, while the specific details and context are replaced with material that carries the same emotional signature from elsewhere in the dreamer's life. The mind is not dreaming about your problem. It is dreaming about the feeling your problem produces and finding everything else in your history that has produced that same feeling. The degree to which a waking experience appears in subsequent dreams is predicted, in part, by the emotional intensity of that experience and by whether it was fully processed at the time. Experiences that were interrupted, unresolved, or emotionally overwhelming at the moment of occurrence are more likely to appear in dream content in the nights that follow. The mind returns to what wasn't finished. This is not rumination. It is an active, organized process of integration, running on a different schedule than the waking mind typically uses. Brain activity patterns during dream reports suggest that the moments of highest narrative complexity in a dream, the scenes that feel most vivid, most story-shaped, most real, show heightened activation in areas associated with spatial cognition and narrative construction. During these peaks, the sleeping mind is not simply generating images, it is building a scene, assembling spatial relationships, establishing context, populating the environment with figures and objects drawn from associative memory. What the dream offers is a world as carefully constructed as any scene the waking mind inhabits, just from different material. One of the most consistent cross-cultural findings in dream research is that emotional content, particularly negative emotion, dominates dream experience across populations, regardless of the overall emotional valence of the dreamer's waking life. The average human dream contains more fear, sadness, and anxiety than the average waking hour. This skew toward negative affect appears to serve a regulatory function. The mind uses the safe environment of dreaming to process, dilute, and contextualize the emotional weight that accumulates during waking life. A life with depth, with loss, with complexity, with the kind of feeling that doesn't resolve in a day, produces richer, stranger dreams. The mind's use of metaphor in dream construction appears to be related to the same cognitive systems that generate metaphorical language during waking. Abstract concepts, time, emotion, morality, self, are understood through concrete physical and spatial schemas. Feeling down, carrying a weight, a wall between us. The sleeping mind uses the same mapping system, but without the constraint that keeps waking metaphor verbal. Instead of generating the thought, "I feel burdened," the sleeping mind builds a scenario in which you are literally carrying something too heavy to put down. What the dream offers is the metaphor made spatially real. People who feel others' emotions deeply tend to carry that attunement into sleep, Research on high sensitivity and high empathy individuals consistently shows more frequent dream recall, longer and more emotionally complex dreams, and dreams more likely to involve other people's emotional states, not just their own. The nervous system that attunes to others during the day continues that attunement at night. Dreaming for a sensitive person is often less about the self than about the emotional world they carry, the people they've absorbed, the feelings they've witnessed, the states they took on and haven't yet set down. When REM sleep goes missing for a few nights, the mind keeps a tab. The brain increases the proportion of the following night's sleep devoted to REM, as if compensating for missed processing time. This REM rebound is associated with more vivid, more emotionally intense, and more unusual dream content. The mind, given the opportunity, runs its emotional processing at higher intensity to make up for what it missed. People who are chronically sleep-deprived may experience particularly strange and vivid dreams on the nights when they finally sleep deeply. The strangeness is the backlog catching up. The thalamus, a structure deep in the brain that acts as a relay station for sensory information during waking, takes on a different role during REM sleep. Instead of relaying external sensory signals to the cortex, it begins generating its own internal signals, producing the sensory experience of the dream, the visual images, the sounds, the physical sensations. The body is essentially paralyzed during REM. Movement signals are inhibited before reaching the muscles, while the mind runs a full sensory experience from the inside. What the dream offers is a world entirely its own. The question of whether dreams have meaning, in a symbolic prosody, interpretable sense, remains genuinely contested in neuroscience. What is not contested is that dreams have function. The emotional processing, memory consolidation, and associative integration that occur during REM serve the dreamer's psychological health, regardless of whether the specific images carry symbolic significance. A dream does not need to be decoded to do its work. What this hour offers is not a decoder ring for your dreams. It is a window into the mechanism, and the mechanism is enough. There is a consistent pattern in the dream reports of highly sensitive people. Dreams that involve detailed emotional landscapes, the precise quality of a feeling, the specific weight of an atmosphere, rather than dramatic narrative events. A less attuned dreamer might report, "I was being chased." A sensitive dreamer is more likely to report the texture of the fear. There was a sense of something wrong. The air felt heavy. And I knew without knowing why that I had done something I couldn't take back. The nocturnal experience is less a story and more a felt environment. The emotional processing that occurs during REM sleep is not limited to the dreamer's own experiences. People who absorb others' emotional states during the day are more likely to incorporate other people's emotional states into their dreams, distinct from processing their own life. A difficult conversation witnessed, a friend's sadness absorbed, the ambient emotional environment of a household, all become material for the sleeping mind. For sensitive people, the night's processing may include not only their own emotional weight, but the accumulated weight of the people they carry. The brain regions most active during creative insight, the anterior temporal lobe and the default mode network, are the same regions most active during REM sleep. Sleep, and particularly REM sleep, significantly enhances the ability to find solutions to problems that require seeing non-obvious connections between disparate elements. The REM sleeping mind is in a measurable sense. In its most creative cognitive state, the nocturnal scenario is not distraction from the problem. For some problems, the ones that require a different kind of seeing, sleep may be the closest the mind gets to solving them. The thinking has slowed in you, the kind of slowing that isn't absence, but depth. What you've been hearing is the mind's most associative state, finding connections that waking logic wouldn't allow. Let one breath come a little longer, and we keep following what the night knows. The vivid images that appear at the boundary between waking and sleep, sometimes called hypnagogic images, offer a brief window into what REM-style cognition looks like from the inside. In the minutes before sleep, as the prefrontal cortex begins to reduce its activity, images arise that are unrelated to current thought. A face, a landscape, an abstract shape with emotional weight. These images are not generated by intention. They appear, and they carry the quality of the waking day's residue. The emotional material that hasn't been processed yet, rising to the surface before the deeper work of REM begins. Somewhere in all of this, childhood appears. Early memories, particularly those with strong emotional content, are among the most frequently recurring elements in adult dreams, even when those memories are not consciously accessible during waking life. Early memories are encoded with strong emotional tags and fewer competing memories. They are, in a sense, the emotional prototype for categories of experience. When the adult sleeping mind encounters a new emotional situation, it may reactivate the original emotional prototype, the childhood scene that first established that particular feeling. As part of the processing, there is a neurological condition called REM sleep behavior disorder, in which the motor inhibition that normally occurs during REM sleep fails, and the person physically acts out their dreams. Researchers studying this condition have been able to observe, in real time, what the sleeping mind is commanding the body to do: reaching, gesturing, speaking, sometimes even running. What these observations reveal is that the sleeping mind is not passive. It is actively engaged in a behavioral scenario, generating intentions, responses, and movements, even when the body is unable to carry them out. You don't watch the dream, you live inside it. Dream content is influenced not only by recent experience, but by what researchers call day residue, the fragments of sensory, emotional, and cognitive material from the preceding day that the mind has not yet fully processed. These residues appear in dream content within the first few nights after the experience, transformed and recombined with older material. The most emotionally salient fragments of the day are not necessarily the most consciously memorable ones. The moment that barely registered, a brief expression on someone's face, a half-heard word, the particular quality of afternoon light, may become dream material precisely because its emotional significance was sensed but not consciously registered. Recurring dreams, those that repeat across months or years, sometimes with nearly identical content, reflect unresolved emotional processing. The mind returns to the same material because the integration is incomplete. Recurring dreams are most common during periods of stress, transition, or unresolved conflict, and they tend to shift or resolve when the underlying emotional situation changes. The mind returning night after night to the same scenario is not the mind being stuck. Persistence, in this light, is the mind being faithful to what still needs doing and continuing until it is done. Over time, sleep edits the archive. Research on emotional memory consolidation has found that the mind preferentially consolidates memories that carry strong emotional valence, both positive and negative, over neutral memories. The experiences that move you, the ones that carry grief or joy or the specific ache of something unresolved, are the ones the sleeping mind works hardest to keep, not because they are useful in a practical sense, but because they carry emotional information the mind treats as significant. Sleep is, among other things, the process by which your life is edited into the version you will carry forward. Some people experience the world at less than arm's length, permeable edges between self and world, between sleep and waking, between their own emotional states and those of the people around them. Research by Ernest Hartman has found that people with this quality of thin boundaries report significantly more vivid, elaborate, and emotionally intense dreams than those with thicker psychological boundaries. They are also more likely to experience the emotional content of a dream as physically present in their bodies upon waking. The morning still holds traces of what the night left. One of the stranger properties of REM sleep is that the mind's sense of time distorts significantly during dreaming. What feels like hours of dream experience may correspond to only minutes of REM sleep, and vice versa. The subjective time of the dream is not anchored to clock time. It follows the emotional pace of the scenario rather than any external measure. Researchers believe this temporal distortion is related to the reduced activity of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which normally maintains our sense of time's passage. In the dream, time moves at the speed of feeling. The relationship between anxiety and dream content is not straightforward. While anxiety disorders are associated with more frequent nightmares and more threatening dream content, they are also associated with higher dream recall overall, suggesting that anxious minds are doing more emotional processing during sleep, not less. The nightmare may be a form of emotional processing that has exceeded the mind's current capacity, a sign not of dysfunction, but of too much unprocessed material arriving faster than the system can handle. You don't need to interpret the nightmare. You only need to let the system continue. The work is happening even when it feels like too much. Something happens in the last hours of the night, during the extended REM periods that close the sleep cycle, that researchers have described as emotional rehearsal. The sleeping mind is not simply replaying emotional scenarios. It is running variations, different responses, different outcomes, different emotional postures toward the same situation. This is the mind's closest equivalent to low-stakes practice. Not practice for a physical skill, but practice for an emotional one. How to hold a loss. How to respond to something that hurt. How to be inside a feeling without being destroyed by it. The capacity of the sleeping mind to generate emotional experience without any external stimulus is one of the things that makes dream science philosophically uncomfortable. You can feel grief that is as real as any grief you have felt while awake, and there is nothing outside you causing it. The grief belongs to a memory, or a composite, or a fear that hasn't happened yet. But the felt quality of it is indistinguishable from waking grief. This tells us something about the relationship between emotional experience and external reality that the mind can generate. From within itself, the full texture of the most significant emotional experiences we have. Something has shifted in the question we began with. We started by asking why the mind would choose its most illogical hours to carry its most important messages. What has become clear is that the mind is not choosing illogic. It is running a different cognitive mode, one organized by emotional weight, cross-modal association, and the linking of things that rhyme in feeling rather than in fact. The question is not why is the nocturnal scenario so strange, but something more interesting. What does the mind know, in its most associative state, that the waking self, with all its logic and sequence and self-management, keeps at a careful distance? That inversion, the thing the logic keeps at a distance, may be something you feel right now as a kind of loosening. The mind that wants to analyze the dream is the same mind that couldn't have had it. Something in the body already knows what the strict thinking doesn't allow. Let that knowing be here. What follows finds what the mind discovers when it stops editing. Many sensitive dreamers report the feeling in a dream that something is wrong before anything wrong has happened. The anterior cingulate cortex, a brain region involved in emotional conflict monitoring, may account for this. It is sensitive to discrepancy, to the gap between what is and what was expected. And during REM sleep, it continues to register emotional discrepancy, even in scenarios that have no direct real-world parallel. What you felt as wrongness was real. The mind was reading something in the emotional material before words arrived to name it. Research on the neurochemistry of dreaming has identified a specific interplay between acetylcholine and serotonin that may account for some of the distinctive qualities of dream experience. During REM sleep, acetylcholine, associated with attention, memory, and the generation of vivid internal imagery, is elevated, while serotonin, associated with emotional stability and reality testing, is reduced. The result is a mind that generates vivid, internally consistent experience, while reducing its capacity to evaluate that experience against external reality. The nocturnal environment of REM is specifically configured to produce immersive experience. This is why the dream feels completely real while you are in it. A specific timing pattern appears in dream content that researchers have traced. Experiences from approximately 5 to 7 days prior tend to reappear, in addition to material from the preceding day. Researchers believe this reflects a two-stage consolidation process. Initial processing in the night immediately following an experience, and a deeper integration approximately 1 week later. For emotionally significant experiences, this means the mind may return to the material twice. Once to begin the work, and again to complete it. A dream about something from last week may be the second pass-through material the mind began working on the night it happened. Lucid dreaming, in which the dreamer becomes aware that they are dreaming without waking, offers researchers a rare opportunity to study the sleeping mind, while the subject maintains some degree of reflective awareness. EEG and fMRI studies show that during lucid dreaming, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, normally quiet during REM, shows increased activity, allowing metacognitive awareness while the rest of the dream machinery continues to run. This points toward a model of consciousness in which the boundaries between sleep and waking modes are more fluid than they appear from either side. Studies have found that REM sleep plays a specific role in processing social and emotional memories, the kind of memories that involve relationships, interpersonal dynamics, and the emotional textures of human connection. Memories of social events show greater consolidation following nights with more REM sleep, and the emotional valence of those memories is more likely to soften, retaining the informational content while reducing the acute emotional distress. After REM-rich sleep, the complicated feelings about the complicated people in your life are among the things being worked on while you sleep. The imagery of dreams often has a quality that psychologists call bizarreness, the violation of the expected properties of objects, people, or events. People who are in places they've never been, objects that behave impossibly, characters who shift identity mid-scene. Research has found that this bizarreness is not random. It clusters around emotionally significant content. The more emotionally loaded the material being processed, the more likely the dream is to represent it in bizarre, transformed, or impossible images. Bizarreness, in this light, is a signal, the dream's way of marking the places where the emotional content is most dense. When the emotional material being processed is overwhelming, as in trauma, the sleeping mind attempts to use the same REM mechanisms that handle ordinary emotional experience, but with material that exceeds the system's ordinary capacity. The result is traumatic dream intrusion, vivid, repetitive replaying of traumatic events in dream content. Importantly, the treatment approaches that most reliably reduce traumatic nightmares, including imagery rehearsal therapy, work by providing the mind with a different ending, a version of the material it can process without being overwhelmed. The brain is trying. It just needs a different story to work with. The role of the hippocampus in memory consolidation has a specific temporal dimension that shapes dream content in ways that are still being mapped. Research suggests that the hippocampus prioritizes schema-inconsistent information during consolidation. Experiences that surprised, confused, or violated the expected. During REM sleep, the hippocampus replays this unexpected material preferentially, working to integrate it into the existing framework of knowledge and expectation. The dreams that feel most disorienting may be processing the experiences that were most disorienting when they happened. Research on the neural correlates of insight has found that the moment of sudden understanding, the aha experience, is characterized by increased activity in the anterior superior temporal gyrus, the same region associated with the associative processing of REM sleep. Problems requiring creative insight are significantly more likely to be solved following a night of sleep than following an equivalent period of waking rest. The sleeping mind is not just consolidating what it learned during the day. It is finding the connections between things it already knew, the links that were there but hadn't been crossed yet. The emotional processing function of REM sleep extends to the regulation of fear memories, a finding with significant implications for how we understand anxiety and its relationship to sleep. Research using fear conditioning paradigms has found that the extinction of conditioned fear is enhanced by post-learning sleep, particularly REM sleep, the amygdala, which encodes the fear association, and the prefrontal cortex, which encodes the extinction memory, interact during REM sleep in ways that strengthen the mind's capacity to hold the fear alongside the knowledge that the feared outcome did not occur. Sleep does not eliminate fear. It teaches the mind to carry it differently. There is a concept in dream research called the continuity hypothesis, the idea that dream content reflects the dreamer's waking concerns, preoccupations, and emotional life in a transformed but traceable way. Research largely supports this. People who are grieving dream about loss. People in conflict dream about conflict. People experiencing major life transitions dream about transitions. But the transformation is significant. The dream does not simply replay the waking situation. It recasts it in terms of older, emotionally related material, often arriving at something that the waking mind's version of the situation had missed. The relationship between the body and dreaming is more active than lying still suggests. During REM sleep, while voluntary muscle movement is inhibited, the autonomic nervous system is highly active. Heart rate and respiration fluctuate significantly. These autonomic responses are triggered by the emotional content of the dream. Fear raises the heart rate. Grief produces respiratory changes. Intense scenarios activate the same physiological responses they would produce in waking life. The body is not asleep in the sense of being unaffected. It is participating, just without moving. The body knew before the story ended. Some people wake from a dream knowing something they can't name. Not information. Exactly. A quality of understanding. Something was clear in a way that it is not clear while awake. And the transition back to wakefulness erased the clarity while leaving the sense that it existed. Some cognitive processing that occurs during REM may be genuinely inaccessible to waking cognition, not because it is unconscious, but because the state-dependent encoding of REM doesn't transfer. The understanding was real. It just lived in a different language. The brain's glymphatic system, a waste clearance mechanism that increases its activity significantly during sleep, clears metabolic byproducts from neural tissue during the night, including proteins associated with neurodegenerative disease. This process is most active during slow-wave sleep, with animal research well establishing the mechanism and emerging human evidence supporting it. The sleeping brain is engaged in maintenance work that affects not just emotional function, but the long-term physical health of the neural tissue. Dreaming is one part of a system that keeps the mind running. A brain that processes emotion deeply at night shows a measurable difference the next day. Research on people who dream frequently and vividly has found this group also shows enhanced waking emotional intelligence, greater capacity for identifying and labeling emotions, stronger theory of mind, higher empathy scores. The relationship appears to be bidirectional. The vivid dream is not a sign of an overactive or disordered mind. It may be evidence of a mind that is developing greater emotional capability through the work it does at night. The experience of dreaming about someone who has died, particularly during acute grief, is one of the most universally reported dream experiences across cultures and throughout recorded history. These dreams appear to serve a specific emotional function. The sleeping mind, which cannot yet fully integrate the reality of the loss, generates experiences of continued connection. They allow the grieving person to continue, in some form, the relational processing that death interrupted. The dream extends what cannot be extended in waking life. People who work in creative fields and who tend to score higher on sensitivity measures and report more vivid dream lives have consistently found that creative insight frequently emerges from dream content. Images, metaphors, connections, structural ideas that surface during dreaming and survive into waking in ways that prove useful. This is not mystical. It is the predictable output of the mind's most associative state. The same cross-modal linking that produces dream bizarreness produces creative connection. The nocturnal mind and the creative mind are running the same underlying process. Sleep doesn't file away the day unchanged. There is a documented phenomenon called sleep-dependent memory transformation. Not only does sleep consolidate memories, It actively reorganizes them in ways not predetermined by the initial encoding. Participants who slept showed evidence of having restructured their understanding of a problem, not simply remembered the facts better, but reorganized the relationship between the facts in a way that made the solution more accessible. Sleep does not just preserve the day, it edits it, reorganizes it, and sometimes arrives at a version of it more useful than the original. The specific quality of emotional memory that survives best across sleep is not the factual content of an emotional experience, but its affective core, the felt quality, the emotional texture, the sense of what it was like. While the specific details of an emotional memory fade over time, the emotional essence remains stable across months and years. A memory from many years ago can still produce the same quality of feeling it produced when it was new. The sleeping mind is preserving and strengthening this affective core, night after night, across a lifetime. Acetylcholine, the same neurochemical significantly reduced in Alzheimer's disease, is elevated during REM sleep. The disruption of REM sleep is now understood to be both a symptom and a potential contributor to the progression of the disease. Animal research, with emerging human evidence, has found that amyloid proteins, whose accumulation is associated with Alzheimer's, are cleared more effectively during sleep, particularly during the slow wave periods adjacent to REM. The dream cycle is embedded in a sleep architecture that has implications for long-term brain health well beyond emotional processing. Back inside the dream itself, a different kind of order holds. The narrative structure of a dream, even when bizarre, typically follows what researchers call local coherence. The events of the dream make sense within the moment they're happening. Even if the overall story has no logical through line, this local coherence is maintained by the mind's prediction machinery, which is running during REM even without the prefrontal cortex's oversight. The mind is still predicting what comes next. It's just doing so with emotional probability rather than physical causation. A character might transform without warning because emotionally, the transformation is predicted. A scene might shift location because emotionally, the new location is where the feeling points. People who are trained to recall their dreams consistently through the practice of keeping a dream journal, for instance, show, over time, not just better dream recall, but qualitatively richer content and greater integration of dream material with waking emotional processing. The practice of attending to the dream, writing it down, holding it, letting it be examined without the demand that it make logical sense, appears to deepen the mind's capacity for the kind of associative, emotionally organized cognition that dreaming represents. Attending to the dream is, in a sense, practicing the mode of cognition the dream uses. The research on REM sleep and emotional regulation points towards something that has implications well beyond sleep science. The human mind has not one, but at least two distinct cognitive modes for processing emotional experience. The waking mode is logical, sequential, self-referential, and editor-supervised. The REM mode is associative, cross-modal, emotionally organized, and runs without the editor. Neither mode is superior. They do different kinds of work. The waking mind is built for navigating the external world. The sleeping mind is built for integrating the internal one. The life that gets only one of them misses something the other was built to provide. For sensitive people, who tend to live at the edge of both waking and dreaming cognition, The relationship between these two modes is often more conscious and more porous than for others. They notice the nocturnal logic bleeding into waking, the metaphorical thinking, the emotional attunement, the tendency to sense the emotional texture of situations before the facts are clear. This porousness is not confusion between fantasy and reality. It is the integration of two cognitive modes that, in less sensitive people, remain more separate. The illogical scenario is one expression of a mind that moves between modes fluidly and brings something back each time. Here is what this arc of science has been building toward. The illogical scenario is not evidence of a disordered mind. It is evidence of a mind doing something intricate and necessary, assembling the emotional truths that waking logic keeps sorted in separate compartments, finding the connections between them, beginning the work of integration that makes tomorrow's emotional life possible. The nocturnal mind is not the mind's failure mode. It is the mind's most honest state, the one that runs without the editing, the self-management, the performance of coherence. What arrives is not the irrational, it is the emotional real, in the only language capable of holding all of it at once. Something has been gathering across all of this. The feeling that the part of you that doesn't make neat sense during the day is not the part that's failing. It is the part that is doing a different kind of work. The sleeping mind is running right now, without asking anything from you. Let it. What we've been circling has nearly the shape of itself. The strangeness of a dream is, in a measurable sense, proportional to the complexity of the emotional material being processed. Simple, well-integrated emotional experiences produce simpler, more coherent dreams. Complex, unresolved, layered emotional experience produces dreams that violate logic, shift space, collapse time. If your dreams are strange, it is because your inner life is rich. The charge is what calls it back. Memory consolidation during sleep is not a passive recording process. It is an active reconstruction. The mind, during sleep, does not simply store what happened. It asks, what is the relationship between this and what I already know the dream is? Among other things, the friction of those questions being asked. And the strangeness of the dream is the friction of the answers not yet fitting. The emotional residue of a dream, the feeling that persists into waking, sourceless, without a clear object, is not the dream failing to end. It is the dream's product. The emotional material has been worked on, shifted, and what remains is softer, more diffuse. The quality of something touched and partially released rather than carried whole. The residue of a grief dream does not feel the same as the grief itself. Something moved. Decades of rich dreaming leave something behind. The accumulation of REM sleep across a lifetime may play a role in the development of sophisticated emotional cognition. The person who has dreamed richly for decades has spent thousands of hours in the mind's most associative, empathic state. This may be one of the mechanisms by which emotional intelligence deepens with age in people who sleep well. Not wisdom accumulated through experience alone, but wisdom shaped, in part, by the nightly working through of that experience. The brain processes the emotional states of others, using the same neural machinery it uses to process its own. The insula, the anterior cingulate cortex, the mirror neuron system. These do not distinguish cleanly between my pain and your pain. For highly sensitive people, for whom this shared circuit is particularly strong. The nocturnal experience may be a space where the boundary between self and other is especially permeable. The dream that seems to be about someone else may be processing the emotional material that person left in you. The nocturnal mind's use of emotional metaphor is not arbitrary. It draws on the same metaphorical schemas that organize the dreamer's waking emotional experience. A person who habitually experiences emotional burden as physical weight will dream of carrying things. A person who understands emotional distance through spatial metaphor will dream of unreachable places. What the nocturnal experience offers is not new metaphors from scratch. It extends the conceptual language the waking mind already uses to make sense of feeling into three-dimensional, time-loosened, physically immediate experience. The slow, gradual quality of waking from a vivid dream. The nocturnal scenario still running, even as consciousness returns. The images fading in layers. Reflects the sequential reactivation of the prefrontal cortex as it gradually resumes its role. Both cognitive modes are briefly running simultaneously. The REM-style associative processing and the waking-style logical processing. This is the moment that sometimes produces unexpected insight. The waking mind catching something the sleeping mind was holding before the language of the night fully closes. Sleep researchers have noted that the emotional content of dreams across a period of therapy or personal change tends to shift in characteristic ways, from scenarios of threat and entrapment toward motion and possibility, from recurring patterns that resist resolution toward sequences that end differently each time. The nocturnal experience, across months and years, tracks psychological change, not as metaphor for the change, but as part of the mechanism through which the change consolidates. The dream is part of how you become it. The experience of waking with a solution to a problem that had seemed intractable is common enough to be culturally well documented. A chemist who found a molecular structure in a dream. A writer who woke with the opening line that had eluded her for months. Research confirms the phenomenon. Problems requiring novel connections are significantly more likely to be solved following sleep than following an equivalent period of waking rest. The sleeping mind processes problems by methods the waking mind hasn't tried yet. One of the more counterintuitive findings in dream research is that the most bizarre dreams tend to be reported not by people in psychological difficulty, but by people in periods of creative growth or major life transition. The nocturnal mind in transformation dreams strangely. The strangeness is the signal of extensive cognitive reorganization. Old frameworks are being revised, and the dream content reflects the friction of that revision. Strangeness, in this light, is not disorder. It is a mind doing something rare. The specific combination of hyperassociativity, reduced self-monitoring, and elevated emotional salience that characterizes REM sleep has led some researchers to describe the sleeping mind as resembling, in certain functional ways, the creative states that artists deliberately cultivate: divergent thinking, free association, reduced inner criticism, heightened sensitivity to emotional and sensory detail. The functional similarity is neurological. The same networks, operating under similar neurochemical conditions. The sleeper is, in a measurable sense, in a creative state, what the creative mind reaches for deliberately. The sleeping mind enters every night. That half-waking moment when the nocturnal scenario is still running. The brief state at the edge of sleep. both entering it and leaving it, is associated with a particular quality of insight. Some of the clearest creative understandings occur in these transitional moments. The edge of sleep is not a neutral threshold. It is a place where the two cognitive modes briefly overlap, and where the products of each can sometimes be passed to the other. Research on grief and dreaming has found that the dreams of bereaved people often involve the deceased person as they were in life. Present, accessible, unchanged. These dreams are consistently reported as comforting. The sleeping mind's reconstruction of the lost person is not denial. It is the relational processing the waking mind cannot complete. The continuation of an attachment seeking a context in which it can still run. What the heart cannot release can still be held here. Every person alive enters this state tonight. Whatever else a life contains, the mind offers the same invitation each night. Something shifts, and the processing begins. In a single night, whatever is unfinished, unresolved, or simply too much to carry in the waking hours has a place to go. The nocturnal mind does not require anything of you. It simply runs. The integration of emotional experience over a lifetime, the gradual process by which painful memories become less acute, by which lost relationships soften from grief into something more like gratitude, is not purely a function of waking cognition or deliberate reflection. Sleep plays a structural role in this integration. Each night of REM sleep is a small installment in the long work of making the emotional past navigable. The strangeness of any particular dream is a local feature of a process whose scale is a human life. For sensitive people, the experience of waking from a vivid or emotionally powerful dream and needing time before the day can begin, the period of lying still, letting the dream recede, allowing the body to return to its waking self, is not inefficiency. It is the natural transition between two cognitive modes that are, in the sensitive person, particularly distinct and particularly porous. The time at the edge of waking is the time it takes for the nocturnal mind to hand its work to the waking one. The nocturnal mind does not primarily think in words. It thinks in images, sensations, emotional textures, spatial relationships, and the felt sense of meaning that precedes verbal formulation. When sensitive people struggle to describe their dreams, or find the words available are inadequate to the experience, this is not a failure of expression. It is the accurate recognition that the nocturnal experience used a pre-verbal language, and that translation into words necessarily loses something of the original. The dream was never primarily a text. It was an experience. Even brief periods of sleep, including naps as short as 20 to 90 minutes, that includes some REM sleep, produce measurable improvements in emotional regulation, creative problem solving, and the processing of recently learned emotional information. The mind does not need the full night to begin the work. Any sleep that reaches REM begins the process. The mind is working. In every moment of REM it can reach, on the material that needs working on. The self that appears in dreams is not a simple copy of the waking self. It is a version of the self with different access. Access to emotional states the waking self manages. Access to fears and longings not permitted full presence during the day. The dream self is not more true than the waking self, but it is less edited. The unedited version of a person carries information about what that person is carrying and what they need. People who sit with their thoughts, without reacting to them during the day, dream differently at night. Research on those who practice regular mindfulness-based practices has found their dream reports tend to show greater awareness of emotional content, less defensive distortion, and more integration of difficult material. The practice of observing thoughts and feelings without reacting appears to carry over into dreaming, creating a nocturnal mind that holds its material more openly. The two modes, rather than being separate, are in ongoing conversation. The grief in a dream is real grief. The love is real love. The recognition, the fear, the connection. In the moment of the dream, they are as genuine as any emotion experienced in waking life. This is not a reason to distrust the waking mind. It is a reminder that the emotional life is not primarily a response to the external world. It is something the mind generates from within itself, shaped by everything it has ever felt, and everything it has never had language for. The experience of highly sensitive people in relationship to their nocturnal lives is often one of paradox. The dreams are vivid and emotionally rich, which makes sleep feel meaningful but also sometimes exhausting. The nightly emotional work that less sensitive people perform without much residue is, for the sensitive person, often felt as actual work that leaves traces in the morning. This is not a flaw in the design. So is what that work produces. What accumulates in this quiet work is something science has only recently been able to describe. The nightly dream is not an interruption of cognitive life. It is a continuation, one that runs on different rules, in a different language, doing the work that waking cognition cannot reach or cannot hold without the editor. Something in you is working, every night, on the things that matter most, not through argument or effort, but through the associative, editor-free processing that only the sleeping mind provides. The sensitivity that makes the illogical scenario possible, the deep processing, the emotional richness, the permeable boundary between self and other, is the same sensitivity that makes the waking life vivid, complex, and sometimes exhausting. The two are not separate qualities. The nervous system that feels more during the day dreams more at night. The mind that absorbs more while awake has more to process while asleep. The illogical scenario is the same capacity, running in the only context where it can run without restraint. You don't have to know what the dream meant. You don't have to remember it, or defend it against the morning's demand for logic. The strangeness was never the problem. The dream that made no sense was made by the most intricately organized organ in the known universe, doing work so specific to your emotional life that no one else could have had it. The illogical scenario is the signature of a mind that feels deeply, processes honestly, and heals in its own language. One that doesn't need your understanding to do its work. Something was true tonight that is still true now. The strange dream is not a sign that your mind is too much. It is a sign that your mind is doing something rare, assembling the emotional truths that logic keeps in separate rooms, finding the connections between them, beginning the integration that the waking day never quite has time for. You have a brain that feels at depth, dreams at depth, and heals at depth. None of that requires your cooperation or your comprehension. It runs in the dark. In the hours when you are finally not managing anything, the strangeness you wake from is the evidence that the work was real. And tonight, the work is already underway. Not because you started it, but because you stopped long enough for it to begin. Something the sleeping mind knows. That creative, healing, honest state is that the work of emotional integration doesn't finish in one night. The question that's been turning here leaves one thread still open. What happens when the self that needs forgiving is the one doing the dreaming? That question lives in the next video in Dream Science. That hour is waiting whenever you are ready. The cross-modal assembling has already begun behind your closed eyes. Connections being drawn between things that share feeling rather than sequence. The editor, quiet. The deeper logic running on its own. Let the breath slow to whatever pace the body wants tonight. The brain that heals in its own language is already healing, not waiting for you to understand it, not asking you to do anything but be here. If the feelings from the night's strange journey are still present, let them be. They are the texture of work being done, not work left undone. You, the one who feels deeply and dreams strangely and wakes still holding what the dream left behind. You are not too much. The mind that carries more processes more, and the processing is the healing. Running now, asking nothing. Good night.